All right, Dave, tell everybody who we have on the show this week.
When you think of great American companies, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean,
Look at your computer. What is that little logo right there on the computer?
Apple?
Yes,
Oh.
Apple.
Oh.
Let's talk to one of the people that was on the ground floor of Apple. We are talking the core. Did you see what I did there?
Oh, I like
the
that.
core
That's
of the
very
Apple.
good. Yeah.
On the start of Apple, we've got Ronald G. Wayne coming up, one of the co-founders.
Right after this.
The following is a Tony Lasano podcast, an Opie show on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. This is the Minutia Men Celebrity Interview with Rick and Dave.
So, as Dave mentioned, you may not know his name, but certainly know the company that he helped start. 47 years ago, he and a couple of guys named Steve incorporated a company called Apple. No, really, that Apple. Please welcome to the show, Ronald G. Wayne. How are you?
Good morning, sir. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this.
Yeah, you don't have to call us sir, but thank you for the respect that we deserve.
Yes, exactly.
I was taught with patient guidance and a skilled hand with a razor strap to be courteous.
Okay, well, thank you.
Well, there we go.
But you don't have to.
Let's set the stage for everybody here. It's 1976. Steve Jobs, who you met at Atari, asked you to help him talk some sense into Steve Wozniak. Take us back to that day 47 years ago.
Well, Jobs and Wozniak had been chums for a very long time. They were together in a computer hobbyists group that took business computers and converted them into personal computers. But, of course, Wozniak had a different idea. He was going to start from scratch and build a machine up from nothing, which is what he did, making it effectively the best product at the best time under those circumstances. However, Wozniak, a brilliant electronics engineer, did not quite understand the elements of business. And he was very parental about his circuitry and insisted on the opportunity to use these circuits in other applications. Whereupon Steve Jobs went straight up the wall, turn left. You can't do that. Whatever circuits you design would be proprietary to our company. And Jobs was, of course, many things, but diplomat was not one of them. you know what a diplomat is. That's a guy who can tell you to go to hell in a way that makes you look forward.
You just have to tell you just have to tell him sir. Yeah, you just have to use the word sir.
Right. At any rate, Jobs came to me. I was, at that time, Chief Draftsman and Product Development Engineer at Atari. And Jobs was never an employee of Atari. He was engaged as a consultant to Nolan Bushnell, the founder of the company, and was selling him circuit designs for new games which have been created by Wozniak. And Jobs came to me one day and he said, I'm having this problem with my partner here, and I don't seem to be able to get him to understand the idea of proprietorship. And I said, well, that's no problem. Bring him over to the house. We'll sit down. We'll chat about it. I get him to understand. Well, Wozniak was a reasonable guy, and it only took about 20 minutes to get the understanding across. It was at that moment in time that Jobs jumped up and said, that's it. We're going to form a company, the Apple Computer Company.
This is never going to work.
And, well, okay, fine. And he and Woz would each hold 45%, and I would hold 10% as a tiebreaker in case any further disputes came up. Jobs felt that I would come down on the side of reason. So that's how effectively this all began.
So you drew up a contract, right? And you...
Yeah, it was quite a surprise to Wozniak. In fact, he could knock his eyes off with a stick when he saw me sit down to a typewriter and type up a 3-page formal contract.
Oh, you did it yourself.
Out of memory? How did you do it? I mean, did you...
I had drawn up contracts like this before. after all, I was in my 40s. Those kids were in their 20s. And I had 20 years experience behind me in all sorts of aspects of business and other things. And I knew how to drop a contract. And Woz in particular was amazed that somebody could sit down and do that. But anyway, that's what I did. And thus was born the Apple Computer Company,
Wow.
of which I was a part.
So, you had mentioned that you were 20 years older than the Steves, right? You're in your 40s, they're in their 20s. So in a sense, a lot of you were the adult in the room, or I don't know if that's the
I
right.
was the mentor, yes.
So let me ask you a question. We don't have visual contact with you, but I assume we're not speaking to you from your villa in the middle of the Mediterranean. So
I have led a charmed life, but at the same time, not a very financially productive one.
Yeah.
A couple months after we began this enterprise, for various good reasons of my own, I decided to part ways with the gentleman, and I went off and did my thing. There was no dispute or argument or anything else. And they understood that, among other things, my passion wasn't computers; it was designing slot machines.
Slot machines, yeah.
Oh.
And that's what I went on to do later on.
So let me ask there's an elephant in the room here. So 10% share you sell back to Steve and Steve.
No, I did not sell it back.
Oh, okay.
I was there to help them out. After I had left the enterprise, several weeks after, I get a check in the mail from Jobs for $800.
Oh.
And then beyond that, they apparently got hold of a finder by the name of Arthur Rock, who found them $25 million to found the Apple Corporation. I didn't know anything about that, except that I got a letter one day from an attorney saying that if I would sign this piece of paper, getting rid of all responsibilities whatsoever under my partnership agreement, that the enclosed check for $1,500 would be mine. And of course, having already done that, I figured this was found money, so I signed the paper, and that was that.
Well, now we're talking real money. You have 1,500 plus 800.
In 1978, or what year was this? 1976. Yeah, that's like
that could buy a whole a truckload of leisure suits.
Yeah, right. So I've read a lot of your article or your interviews, and you seem not to have any regrets that you did this.
No, none whatsoever. But to begin with, these guys, I knew I was standing in the shadow of giants. And this was one of the reasons I separated myself, is because as a product development engineer in my own right, I knew that I was never going to get a project of my own.
You were always going to be in their shadow.
That's correct. But worse than that, Jobs had looked on while I restructured the entire purchase parts documentation system for Atari. And he was very impressed with that. As a matter of fact, I think he probably copped a copy of the manual to give to whoever it was he made chief draftsman at Apple, and said, "I want you to use this." Okay. But at any rate, these guys were whirlwinds. It was like having a tiger by the tail. And it was just easy for me to say, thank you very much, guys. I hope I've been helpful. I will fade from the scene. And that was it. That was essentially the end of my participation in Apple.
Now, had you talked to them afterward? I mean, it seemed like you parted well. Did you have any contact with them?
Very intermittently, over a span of a couple of years. Yes, but there were just intermittent conversations. Nothing significant, and nothing related to business.
I always have this vision that, like, Paul McCartney and John Lennon would call Pete Best, and brag that how rich they were. They never did that to you, did they? They didn't say, "Hey, look, bought another yacht. How you doing?" They never did anything like that, did they?
Right.
No, that's. Did you buy an Apple? Are you an Apple user?
I have never owned an Apple product.
Really?
I never even had a computer until 15 years later. And people would ask me, well, what kind of computer do you own? I said, well, I don't. I don't have one. And they said, why not? I said, what would I do with it? You give me a reason for having one, I'll get one. Otherwise, computers were not my thing.
Well, obviously you're an author, so now computers are.
You could write your book.
Exactly. You've written 3 books.
I use the internet, and I use a word processor and to do my typing. And yes, I adapt to those elements of the modern world that I find useful. If I don't find it useful, I don't do it.
Have you heard of TikTok? I think this TikTok, your TikToks could go crazy with your story. I think that this would be great.
So I'm looking at your books here. You've written 3: Insolence of Office, Sociopolitics, Socioeconomics, and the American Republic.
Some light reading.
There's another one called Adventures of an Apple Founder, which I'm sure covers a lot of the ground.
That is my autobiography.
Okay, great. And then most recently, this one's kind of interesting to both Dave and I. It's called Counterfeit Trust and the Nature of Money.
Yes.
Tell us about that book.
And that just came out in August, right? I mean, or it's just a few.
Well, it will be in formal print within the month.
Okay.
Right, and it deals with the fact that we have, as everyone knows, a rather substantial inflation. The only problem is that most people have absolutely no idea where that inflation came from or where we're headed. And that, unfortunately, is kind of bad because when the roof caves in, which it will, a lot of people are going to be looking around saying, what happened? I don't understand what's going on. And because they don't understand, I made it my job over the last 60 years to try and get people to understand, not with a great deal of success, unfortunately. I would like to get everybody in the country to understand where this inflation came from. And it came from, of all places, a conference in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire in 1944 at the tail end of World War II. What had happened was that World War II, without going into all the subtle details of it, was literally the most expensive war in human history. So what had happened as a result of that is that of the 40 Allied nations, more than half had already gone bankrupt. In those days, how do you fight a war without money? It meant, how do you fight a war without gold? And these people had spent everything they had, and there was more war to come, and how are they going to deal with it? So the 40 Allied nations sent a total of 720 representatives to a conference at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to decide what they were going to do about the problem. Well, what they decided to do was to take the world off the gold standard and have the currencies of the world become what's called fiat money, money by decree, money with no substance behind it, except the word of the issuing government.
Kind of like your 10% of Apple.
Yeah. And this set up the beginnings of a 70-year inflation. And unfortunately, there are countries around the world that have gone into hyperinflation. Germany, of course, is remarkable of them. Because of the reparations that they had to pay to France. And they were absolutely destitute at the end of the war. They had no gold, no silver. Their money was nothing but worthless paper. Well, by 1921, as a result of that, it was 50 marks to mail a letter.
Right.
By the end of 1921, it was 100,000 marks to mail a letter. By the end of 1922, it was 20 billion marks to mail a letter.
But they were great stamps, though.
Yeah,
they were really pretty stamps.
I have two of those 20 billion mark stamps. one of them is canceled. It actually carried a letter.
Wow.
I mean, the inflation in Germany at that time was so bad that when you went into a restaurant to have a meal, you would pay for your meal in advance, because if you waited until the meal was over, the price would have gone up.
Yeah. Amazing.
So at any rate, as I say, there are countries all over the world that have gone into this kind of hyperinflation. I think the most remarkable is a country in Africa, Zimbabwe. And they finally issued a note for 100 trillion Zimbabwean dollars. And that was the last piece of money they issued. After that, they stopped issuing money altogether and adopted the U.S. dollar as their currency. And somehow or other, people go into hyperinflation, and they work their way out of it, largely because they're surrounded with countries with viable economies with whom they can trade and rebuild their economy. The problem with what happened at Bretton Woods was the whole world went off of gold. Gold, which had been a stable currency for 3,000 years. And suddenly it wasn't there anymore, and what you had was paper money. And the net result was an inflation that is now worldwide. Now, when you have a country going into hyperinflation, they can rely on other countries to help them out. When the whole world is on fiat money, the whole world goes into hyperinflation. Then what do? It's like your house catches on fire, and you call the fire department. They send out the wagon, and they take care of it. But what do you do if the whole town, including the fire department's on fire? Then who do you call? The point is that when that happens on a worldwide basis, forgive the expression, that is the end of civilization as we know it.
Wow, this has been
this is an upper.
Yeah.
No,
So I'm guessing that you have all your savings in precious metals. Is that true?
My savings is principally in common U.S. silver coin.
Okay.
Because what is going to happen, I'll make this prediction, and everybody out there should remember where they heard it, and that is at some point in time, you're going to go down the street, and it's going to be a big sign saying hamburger, $5 or 25 cents silver. Okay, and then about a month later, you go down the same street, and it's going to be hamburger, $10 or 25 cents silver. And after that, it's going to be keep your toilet paper, just give us the 25 cents silver. Now, make this prediction as what will happen, because it has already happened here once before. In 1980, when there was a big run-up in silver and gold.
Right.
The brothers.
Right. I opened the newspaper one day, and there's a full-page ad. You want to buy a brand new Chevrolet for $400. Silver dollars, please. You want to buy a brand new TV set for $10. Silver dollars, please. It was a lark at that time. The next time, it'll be serious.
Wow.
And businesses will be selling their services or their products for denominations, in two denominations, one to be payable in paper money and the other much lower in silver coin. So the only defense that the average citizen really has is to start squirreling away silver dimes and quarters at your earliest opportunity and to whatever extent you can manage. This is what you will have as money, because when the roof caves in, that silver coin will enable you to buy anything or anyone you want.
Wow.
Okay.
And those who don't have it are going to be up the tributary without the usual device.
When is this going to happen? I'm just curious. Hypothetically, when do you?
Everybody asks me that question.
Yeah.
And the answer is, my crystal ball blew a fuse last week.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. Well, if you would have bought an Apple crystal ball, that wouldn't have had a problem.
Right.
So the book is called Counterfeit Trust and the Nature of Money. Correct?
Yes.
And where can people find it?
It should be available at Amazon. It could probably wind up on iTunes and Kindle. electronically, I expect.
Okay.
And that's basically it.
And it's going to be $19 in US and 3 cents in silver, right?
Yeah.
Is that what the
3 times 30 cents.
30 cents?
Ronald, thank you very much for coming on the show. This has been
has
a really interesting conversation. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you for this opportunity to get people to at least take a look at this problem. The book is essentially as a single line heading. It says everything you always wanted to know about money but were afraid to ask.
Yeah.
And it's important, it is critical that people have this information now because time is telescoping fast.
Well, thanks for
thanks.
Not only scaring the crap out of all of our listeners, but thanks for the advice,
I do appreciate it. And have a great day. Thanks, Ronald.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Bye-bye. There he is. Wow. Yeah, that was an upper.
Yeah. No.
Well, I've been hearing this
forever.
It could happen.
Right.
It could happen.
Yeah. I remember my grandfather telling stories that they paid their maid service in bags and bags of cash.
Yeah.
Right. So there's some advice from the guy who sold Apple 10% rate.
Well, there is that.
but
is
no,
in
what
the
he
back
says,
of your head.
what he says is very.
But thank you very much to Ronald Wayne for being on the show. We need to thank some people on our end here. We need to thank Tony Lasano from opishows.com. Opie is hippo backwards. We should thank Brandon Herman, who scored us this guest. We also have to thank Ed Silla with Radio Misfits,
who actually just called and want to know how you're feeling.
Is that right? Because I don't think he has. He has not reached out to me.
He's pretty concerned about it.
Well, no, I don't think he is. RadioMisfits.com. Great Talk Radio isn't dead. It just moved to a better place. RadioMisfits.com. And we'll be back again soon with a brand new episode of
Minutia Melon Celebrity Interview.
The preceding was a presentation of Opie Productions. Find our other great shows wherever you find podcasts, including opishows.com. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of Opie Productions.
Tony, can you shut up?